We are thrilled and fortunate to have another Friday to engage in a conversation, to explore the mindset, the mentality, and what Bionic Sales is all about. And Douglas and I have we have several stories to tell, don't we, Doug?
Always. Multiple.
Always. Multiple. And I get the feeling that other people have a story to tell. What do you think about that?
Sorry, I was getting situated. Yeah, look, I think everybody's got a story to tell. I think everybody needs to tell their story.
Yeah.
And if we're talking about sales, as salespeople, it's our job to nurture, to massage that story out of them in some cases.
That's actually a great way of putting it. Let me make sure that I've made both you and Jess moderators, because somehow, some way, I've been given the power to do that. So there we go. That's the last time I'm going to look at who's in the room, because
You have the power all along. Just click your screen 3 times.
There we go. Click it 3 times. Not the ruby slippers, but the screen.
Unless you're wearing ruby slippers, I really don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, no, I'm so sorry I brought that up.
Morning, Jess.
So, hey, Jess. Not yet. Okay. So,
I'm here. I'm sorry. I was trying to get all of our information in the chat. How are you guys?
Well, we're doing well, and I'm kind of surprised that Doug kind of called you out so early on, because we know that you're doing that important administrative stuff in the background, getting people engaged and involved. There have been a couple of stories that I have heard this week, Doug, that you and I, some of them we touched on. We certainly have a story where you and I faced something together that I think probably scared me more than it scared you. I don't know. I don't know what the who's more scared meter looks like, but it is something that was about a 20-minute shared experience that I certainly will never forget. And we'll talk about that later if people are interested. But since
you were definitely more scared than I was.
Oh my God. I am, and I tell you what, man, I am so grateful that we are not doing that project, working on that project today, because here in Southwest Idaho, we've got about a half inch of snow on the ground. And if you and I were up in those mountains, driving down that road that looked like it was about 4 inches wide, I'm sorry, I may have had a cardiac event.
I think you were giving me a cardiac event by your cardiac event, but might as well tell everybody. It was a pretty. We were working on the Bionic Sales book, which we're very excited to be getting wrapped up here soon. And I had decided that the easiest way to fly back from Boise was at 6:30 in the morning, realizing that I booked a cabin quite remote, and that the ride home was going to be pretty narrow, and John's side would be on a cliff, and my side would be watching John watch a cliff.
So here's the exchange was, I don't like this. I really don't like this. And that was me. And then Doug was saying, but I can do it. I can drive. And I'm thinking, I will be worse. I will be
You actually
nervous.
think that. You said, I go, you want me to drive? You want me to drive? You go, that would be worse for me. I wouldn't be able to take it. I'm like, then you need to drive this time.
And I appreciate you reaching into the higher register to do the impression, because I was, man, that's
my favorite line is, stop raising your voice. You're raising your voice at me. That's true.
I forgot about that. So what a great way to open up a conversation about stories, because it was not funny in the moment. It was not even funny later that day when I tried to express to my wife how scared I was and how intense it was. And she's just sitting on the couch looking at me like, well, I think you made it. You're okay now. Because after the fact, it's difficult to bring someone into your story and have them feel the same emotions, the same depth or the same intensity. And I think that salespeople, all of us, we become so in love with what we do that we think that the more we tell others about what we do, or how great what we do is, our company offers, that level of intensity will be shared. And I think there's a level of finesse and honestly artistry to finding a way to get people interested in pursuing your story. You know, we've talked here in the Bionic Sales Room before about how much I love the larger work, and I'm so thrilled that Doug and I are deep into what this book is going to look like, feel like, sound like. We're deep into it. I mean, we spent 2 days. I probably spent about 3 hours, but Doug spent 2 full days working on this, and
That's not true.
well, okay, 5, and there is depth there. There is an expanse there. And when I wrote my first novel, the idea was not how big of a piece can I do. It was how far can I reach to create this universe, to create this experience, this story. I'm currently reading a fantastic novel by a guy named Anthony Dewar, and it's got a really interesting name. It's called Cloud Cuckoo Land. And what brought me to this book was I read another piece by him called All the Light We Cannot See. And when I read that book, All the Light We Cannot See, I wanted to read it slowly because this guy crafts sentences that are so beautiful and so the imagery is so powerful that as soon as I finish Cloud Cuckoo Land, I'm going to go back and read All the Light We Cannot See again. And I've read several novels more than once because the number one, the journey, the separation from where we are, the moment that we're in, and second, the deeper we get it involved in a story, the more interested we are in other stories. And when we tell our own story, and we all have hundreds, some of us thousands, I think what it does is it helps us to tell that story with key components: imagery, metaphor, color, depth. And for the time that we have been working together, as well as that intense time at the cabin up in the mountains above the lake here in Boise, so many things remind us of other stories, experiences, books, movies, whatever. And the selling conversation is not linear. It has to be, well, it has to be. I believe it operates at its highest possible level when it is fluid, and it can take a sharp left turn at any time based on what we hear, not based on what we feel compelled to say. So that's my thought about stories. And Doug, you can jump in.
Worst time for me to be reaching for my mute with wet hands. Sorry, I'm like, is this where he's going to end? You know, I wanted to add something to. Like, I literally was pouring a drink of water, and I'm like, oh shit, he's getting to an end. He's getting
Of
to an end.
course I am. Of course.
Gonna wrap. I know. I wanted to add something earlier that you said. You know, it's like, I don't think either one of us would want to go through that situation again. But there's no way in hell I wouldn't have had that situation happen because the story is so good.
Mm.
And it's like, if you could go back, would you change anything? Hell no, because I have nothing to talk about. But it's the thing about sales is you got to get up and do it again. It's going to be a different hill, but it's going to be just as exciting. I mean, it's not in the, it's not typically in sales where the person you're working with looks at you and it's like, I can't do it. Well, there's a lot of times like that, but you're not on a cliff. But you're on an emotional cliff. You're on a financial cliff. You're on a lot of cliffs. And sales is about maintaining the journey, but it's also about telling the story of the journey. And I think the other thing about stories is, our memories fade, our recollections are different. But a good story ages like wine. It matures. It gets better. It adds notes and nuances. Things start to come from it that you might not even had the first time you've told it. And it matures because it's based in this organic truth and this hero's journey that everybody shares, this shared symbiosis of experiences. But a shitty story falls apart, just like a shitty wine. It doesn't have the components, the quality the time, the truth, the essence that makes it so good that it wants to be retold, that others want to share it. And so when you tell a good story, the audience, they become a part of the story over time. In fact, I know some people tell old stories. They actually add stories about when they told this story to somebody else because it adds a certain flavor or their response fit in a certain way. And I think that's what's so beautiful about it is that we're all evolving our own story in each other's story together. And as a good salesperson, they tie it all together.
Okay, Jess, you have got to grab that clip because Doug just wrote some of the most colorful and clear stuff, even after our time of specific focus. So that is that. Not
What was I
only
talking about?
yeah, I have no idea, but it sounded good, and that's all that really matters. No, here's the thing, brother. You immediately jumped. You were in a state of flow, right? Which we have experienced so many times in 3 years, and I think that experience of removing ourselves, doing that cabin in the woods thing. We didn't see anybody for 2 days. We saw some elk, we saw some wild turkeys. That was cool, but the way that you walked us through what stories are about and why they work. That has got to go in the book. And I started by talking about some of the stories that I've heard recently. Two of them are ongoing stories. Both of them are from new clients of mine, and very, very different, completely different backgrounds. But the depth and the resonance and the truth and the wonder in both of these stories has me so energized that, number one, I'm working longer in the day, and Doug, you know how I feel about that. Uh, if I can work for 4 hours and knock off and pick up my guitar, I am a happy man.
I think you even warned me about that. You're like, I work hard, but for about 5 hours. I'm like, well, we've
That's
got
right.
48. There's a lot of fives in a row.
That's why I start at 6 in the morning, so it's like lunch, a little bit more work. See ya. But at the same time, I have worked toward that schedule and that freedom for 24 years. And the stories are wonderful. Going back to the two stories that I've heard most recently, one of which I have been invited to be a part of, and I have a new client that does offshore engineering placement. So long-term temporary contracts, long-term employment for engineers offshore. And for those of you that don't know what offshore is, here in the United States, offshore means it could be in Latin America, it could be elsewhere. And I was compelled and I was inspired to hear the story that the person that founded this company wanted to, of course, wants to be profitable, but that's not where the story began. The story began with, there is engineering talent here that can compete with engineering talent anywhere on earth. And by my company employing them at a fair, bordering on generous rate, we can improve their quality of life. That bowled me over, as my parents used to say. That almost knocked me off my chair. And that story is continuing because every single day he's got people that are working, that are making a livable wage or better. And the longer they are with him, the better their life is, at least their financial opportunities. I mean, I don't know what's going on in their home and all that stuff, but that's not the point. The point of the story is that when we have a deep human purpose, success finds us. It finds us. It knocks down the front door. A deep human purpose gives us an opportunity to write a story that people want to participate in, that people, like you said, Doug, and that was one of the parts I liked the best. You said, not only do people tell the story, but they tell the story of when they've told the story to other people. And I hope your hands aren't wet because I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I was like, you actually got me on a little bit of a pause. No, it's think about the best stories we tell, and I want to emphasize this because I was watching something about the human brain, and it's like, it's insane how much we lose, really, and without even realizing it, the amount of memory that we actually drop off in the first year of an experience, to the point where it's not even really the same experience anymore. It's an experience of the experience. And, what we do is we hold on to those gems, those beautiful moments. And it's interesting. Like, you and I can sit together and tell a story, and I can hear you say something, and then I might say, well, wait, didn't it happen this way? And you go, oh, that's right. And then this happened. So you're even telling yourself the story again. So I think a lot of times we tell stories because there's something in that story for us every time we tell it. And when the good ones are told, the real gems of stories are told, there's lessons, there's learnings, there's things that happened to us 10, 15 years ago that we might tell a story about and not even realize until the moment we're telling it. Holy shit, I didn't even realize at that time. Because as these things evolve, so do we. And our perceptions of reality and what it really meant isn't even what happened in that moment. It's the experience the two people shared and how they felt. And as long as you can get back to that emotional state in the way you tell that story, it resonates with others because then they feel what you feel.
And someone's on fire this morning. This is I could listen to you talk all day. So what you made me think of is okay. Thank you. I love you too. The what this makes me think of, and again, and whenever you tell a story, it makes everyone that's sitting around you think of another story. We have a circle of friends that we knew in Southern California. When we moved here to Southwest Idaho 2 years ago, there was conversation about one of the couples moving here as well. They ended up moving here 4 months later, and 2 months after that, their closest friends, who were the other two in the circle, moved here. So there's 3 couples, 6 people who moved from Southern California to where we are now. And it is amazing to me how I will not necessarily be in the mood to socialize, visit, talk, whatever. And I think, I'm not the one that has to come up with anything to talk about. And 20 minutes into being in the room with these people, all of us have 6, 7, 8, 9, 15 things to talk about. And the ongoing stories, the different versions of stories are fascinating to hear. And when you were talking about how we remember things, it made me think of me being introduced to the French novelist Marcel Proust. And he wrote these very long stories about, it's fiction, but it's based on his own life. And he tells these stories of experiences he had when he was younger, and the drama in the stories, and what Salvador Dali calls the persistence of memory. The persistence of memory is, here's the image as it was. Here's my description of the image. And then here's how I described to others what I felt, thought, or saw when I looked at that image. All of this relates to selling, specifically bionic selling, because bionic sales is journey to the center of self. Journey to the center of selling, and that puts us on a journey to the center of self. Selling is an act of service. It is difficult because not everybody that we introduce ourselves to is looking for, feels like assessing or evaluating the service that we provide. And it doesn't matter if we sell a product, a service, an experience, a platform, or an idea. Selling, the act of selling, is an act of service. And the stories that go along with that, like Doug, like one of your favorite stories that I've told you recently, is the manager that I used to work for when I was an executive recruiter.
Dan Levy.
Dan Levy. That guy was intense. And for me to refer to someone as intense, believe me, they emit and they exude an energy and an edge and an intensity that was virtually tangible. I mean, when this guy walked in the room, Everybody knew it. He would not call attention to himself. What he did called attention to himself. So there's an old joke. I joined joined a support group for compulsive talkers called On and On and On and On. I want to make sure that I'm not going on and on here today. Go ahead.
No, you're just going on, but you're not going on and on because this content is relevant. And it's funny because we always talk about the dynamic of these calls, and it's like it's organic. I'm just enjoying you talk, and the reason I'm coming up with this stuff is because I'm listening and present. But you know, I, storytelling is the oldest trade in essence. We say sales, but sales is storytelling because look, if somebody had to go from one tribe to another and convince them that the thing they found is good enough to trade with the thing they have, they're going to have to tell a story about it. They can't say, look at this sharp rock. They have to say, this sharp rock, when I attached it to stick, got us dinner and we ate well and everybody is happy. Well, we want that feeling. We'll give you these beads, It's like the first salesman was the tribespeople's trade. That's who went and got those items, and they couldn't get it without a story to tell. And that story was always something they could share that helped go on. And that's how not just history. We always like to say history is passed on through stories. Everything was passed on through stories until we started writing shit down.
Every
Until we
single
started
thing.
writing everything,
All
medicine,
mythology.
food.
And mythology, I mean, mythology exists today because we, as you said earlier, the first time we tell a story, it's probably about 97% accurate, right? And I say 97% because all of us will get caught up in the telling of the story and we will forget a detail, or we will, we'll realize that the timeline, we didn't represent the timeline. I love.
But accuracy isn't about the message.
Or the message is not about accuracy, which is
Right. Being accurate doesn't deliver a message. You could tell somebody word for word how to bake a cake, but unless you show them how a cake is made and tasted and what happens, it's just words. But when you emphasize, and the thing about stories is they're about evoking emotion. And so sometimes you got to fine tune a story. You don't stretch the truth. You re-emphasize certain parts because you want to evoke that emotion out of someone so they could feel what you're feeling.
I
And that's
love
why
this.
whenever somebody tries to repeat a comedian and they can't do it right, and they're like, "Oh, you had to be there. I can't say it like they said it." It's because you're trying to evoke laughter. You're not trying to tell somebody what a comedian said. You're trying to get someone to laugh like you laugh
Yes,
when
you
you
want them to
heard it.
experience it. Yes.
Yes, you're trying to pass an experience. And so when we talk about back in the day, stories were necessary because you had to establish trust because there wasn't any innate knowledge. When you walk into a classroom today, kids are told, listen to your teacher. Everything they're telling you is coming from something of knowledge, of experience. But if you go all the way back, I mean, there wasn't that much experience. You had to tell the story because somebody's gonna be like, I live in the show me state right now, but you got to show me. I don't got to believe you that rock's going to work. Tell me a story that makes me believe. Tell me a story that trusts you because I want to feel what you felt in that moment. Otherwise, you could just be making this shit up. So stories, they develop and build trust because as soon as someone can feel what you're feeling or experience what you're experiencing or saying, as we say about comedians a lot, I liked him because he said what I was thinking. I just couldn't say it that way. That's why you
I
laugh.
just couldn't say it out loud.
Yeah, I couldn't communicate what I was feeling in the way that this person did. And now I'm laughing, not just because it's funny, but because you just released something in me. I did not have the capability of emoting in a way that I could get out. And now I can. And now I can share that with others and make them laugh over something that I already owned before I heard it.
And the reason that you love that is because you share it with someone else. I don't know anyone that goes to a comedy show alone. We went to go see Brian Reagan when he came here to Boise. We
The
brought 6 people
comedian
with
does.
us. The what?
The comic. You said, I don't know if anybody goes to a comedy
You-
show alone. I said, the comedian.
The comedian does. That's exactly right. Well, he brings his entourage, I'm sure.
Oh, it's time a little more
Um,
deep than that. You know what I mean?
yes. So, what your story also made me think of, shocking, I know, is there is a scene in one of the Star Trek movies, and there are innumerable Star Trek movies. This is when Shatner and Leonard Nimoy were still making Star Trek movies. And I don't remember which movie it is, and I'm sure that's listening does remember which one it was. But if you know the character Spock, you know that he's all about logic. He had a human mother and a Vulcan father, and he was raised Vulcan, and he's mostly Vulcan, and all this stuff. So something goes on where Spock has to um, misrepresent something so that he and Kirk can get out of whatever situation they're in. And Kirk is just aghast. He's just shocked. And he looks at Spock and he says, "You lied." And Spock raises his eyebrow and says, "I exaggerated." What a difference of perception. What a fine line distinction. What a razor's edge. Was what he said a lie, or was it an exaggeration? And we salespeople, boy, we like to exaggerate. This is going to be the greatest thing. Oh, your entire company is going to change because of this. Oh, your life 3 years from now is going to be so much better. Well, easy.
Well, then I
What
think
are your
there's a
product?
difference between, because saying your life is going to change and doing those things, those exaggerations, it's getting a little dangerous there, right? Because you don't know that.
Right. And
But
you
the
can't guarantee it.
exaggeration is it. But when you tell a story about someone else and you exaggerate their level of satisfaction a little bit, that's that's overemphasizing a message.
I didn't lie. I
It's one thing to
exaggerated.
say, and that saved his business. Well, that and six other things that the person had to do after that. But,
Right.
it's different than, and this thing will save your business. So that's a lie. That's not an over exaggeration, but I think the Spock thing, and I'm not a Star Trek guy, but I know what you're talking about because it is a pretty major thing because everybody's like, oh my God, Spock lied. It wasn't logical, da 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 da, but it was logical. In that scenario, the most logical thing for him to do was exaggerate.
Mm,
And so
precisely.
I think that it's not black and white in the sense that I always, I don't remember when I used to do this, but it's like I had a program or something I talked about where I'm like, well, it's sometimes you have to lie, and people are like, where? And I'm like, well, if we just got terrorists just came in the building and pointed a gun at me and said, where are the children? I'm not going to be like, sorry, but my moral code tells me you got to go in the closet. It's like lying to deceive for bad reasons is a bad thing. Lying is a bad thing 99.9% of the time. But life isn't black and white, and exaggeration is a lot different than misdirection. Overemphasis and exaggeration is a way of telling a story in a way that we all know, all right, it wasn't exactly how it went, because none of our stories are exactly how it went, but it's in the same direction, narrative, and emotion. It is not a misdirection. It is not a change of environment because look, even let's leave it this way. When we're kids, when we're young, and we tell stories, we tell them the way we want to be perceived or the way we want them to be
Yes.
perceived.
Yes.
But when we become an adult, we often will say, when I used to tell this story, I would lie and say, or I would leave
Exaggerate.
this part out because I was too embarrassed to share that I was scared. Because now
Mm-hmm.
the story is not an exciting story to pump up your friends about how you handle the bully. Now it's
Mm-hmm.
a real story about how you handled fear. And the audience doesn't want to hear you rev them up about a fist fight you had. They want to hear you have an emotional understanding of why you did it and why you don't do it anymore. So that
Mm.
story's power and emphasis and direction, it went in the same way, but it shifted because when the truth, like I said about wine earlier, when that story matured and when the real notes came out, it was a much deeper story than the one that was told 100 times in my 20s.
Right. And that wine, the
Same
older it
story.
gets, it's the same story, and the older the wine gets, and the more you pay attention to your palate, the more you fall in love with that wine. And each time that we tell a story, any human being, and this was the whole point of Proust's work, every single time we tell the story, some detail changes to the point where I think one of the things that you may have seen in this documentary or television show you were watching about well, again, there's the brain and there's the mind, right? The brain is the physical entity. The mind is the limitless space, experience, potential, whatever. But Proust's whole point was every time he remembered something specific, there was some detail that changed while he told the story. So as you said, this is how we want the story to be perceived? Is it how we want to be perceived? Or do we want the story to get better? Is there something that we thought we missed? And throughout this entire conversation for the last 35 minutes, Doug, every couple of minutes, what comes to my mind is that great T-shirt that says, "Great story, bruh. Tell it again."
Yeah, I mean, and I think that the insult in that, the sarcasm in that is that
That's
when
sarcastic?
someone says great, well, either way, great story, bro. Yeah, it's kind of like I laughed, I cried, it was better than cats. It's the idea being is that if you're gonna, when somebody says they have a story to tell you, your expectations are high.
You sit on the edge of your chair. You're ready. You're hoping to.
I got a story to tell you.
Yes. You're hoping it's going to be not only that it will.
And it doesn't matter who it is.
I know.
No matter what.
I'll tell you.
Speaking, even when you know that person tells horrible stories, you're like, I'm still want to hear what happened.
I still
and then that person goes, oh, they were out of milk at the supermarket, and you're like, son of a bitch.
Or
please tell me somebody shot at you with the milk. You know,
that's right. Please tell me you saw a cow walking down the street.
I want excitement. I need an arc.
I want excitement. We had friends that we knew for a long time in Southern California, and both of our families spent an inordinate amount of time together. It was wonderful. It just was great. We basically, Bill and Connie and Terry and I raised all four of our kids together. And whenever Bill would sit up on the couch and say, "Oh, I got a great story," my son and I would look at each other like, "This is going to suck." He was the worst storyteller, but because we loved him, we would say, "Oh, good." And it would take probably about 3/4 of the way through his story before we would start giving him shit. Like, wait a minute, when did this happen? Wait, was this you or someone you knew? Because he just was such a horrible storyteller. So now the story is that we loved Hobson's stories because he could never get them right.
I mean, I have a tendency to tell stories like a Tarantino film where things kind of bounce around in timeline and whatnot.
Cut to this. Quote that.
So you made me realize this only because there is a great story about me telling a story.
And, oh my God.
And I was out and there was alcohol involved. John, I'm just going to say this.
I thought Jess was going to tell us this.
No, this was Jess. I don't think Jess knows this story.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I am not prepped for this story.
No. So this was when I was working at the startup and the last job, and my VP of sales, who lived in Minnesota, who only came into town, 4 or 5 times a year. Now we had established a friendship, but he didn't know me as well as my other friend that went out with us. And after probably what was way too many Manhattans, I decided to tell a story I will not tell today. It's a little too graphic and way too long for the session. But as I'm telling the story, and in a much more exaggerated state than normal, which took about 20, 30 minutes and had about 6 parts, I could see them just whispering to each other the whole time. And as I'm going and it's going longer and longer, Ryan's going, there's no way. And I just looking at my buddy Craig and he's going, nope, you still got it. And Ryan's going, there's no way. And I finish the story and Ryan goes, motherfucker, he actually told him. And Craig just goes, yep, $20. He'll always finish if you let him. And it was just like, it was crazy because, I mean, the story, which I can remember right now and I could tell if I wanted to, but that has become a story because it was just a great summary. And I've told this before where it's like, if you give me long enough, I'll get to the point. And it's kind of my ongoing.
That is the quintessential. That is the quintessential. If you know Doug This describes him better than anything else. If you just give him time, he will get to the end of the story. That is because, Doug, when you have so many resources to draw from. I mean, the experiences that you've had, the slice of life that you have seen, from when you ran nightclubs to when you booked talent to when you worked for the startup, from growing up on Long Island. I mean, my God, it amazes me that you and other people that I know can tell stories about things that happened to them when they were 11. I I remember being 11 because I've seen pictures of myself at 11. I don't remember anything else. Now, is that because I'm so much significantly older than you? I don't know. But
Well, I
you're,
mean, no, look, I mean, but here's the thing: do I really know if I was 11? I don't know. I mean, I've told these stories in front of my parents, and my father would be like, "Actually, I was the summer," and I'm like, "Does it matter? Did
well,
it matter?" The point of the story wasn't whether it was warm or cold, so it doesn't. I never talked about the weather. Sorry if I didn't,
mm,
accurately get the date down. But a lot of
mm,
times when that happens, and I shouldn't. I was being very arbitrary there, but I mean, this is actually a true version with my mother. I didn't realize Dr. Nate had me on his podcast, and I didn't realize in the podcast about 40 minutes in, I was talking about stuff with my parents, my ADHD, and that story where I was like, I think it was like 6 or 7, and I sold all my books and my mother asked me why I sold my books, and I said because I read them already. Um, Interestingly enough, while I was talking about my ADHD later on, I said I have trouble reading. None of that was relevant to what the whole point of the story was, but because it affected my mother in a way, because she felt guilty about not identifying my ADHD, which really had everything to do with my success. And I thank her for not identifying, because back then you didn't identify that shit. But the point is all she could say was, she said, I'm a little confused. If you have trouble reading, how come you were able to read the books you were able to sell? And I'm like, they were children's books, Mom, and that wasn't the point of the story. And I wasn't lying. Like, I don't
that
know why you're
wasn't the
trying to
point of the story, Mom.
detective act my story to make sure, because what she was doing was trying to poke holes in it to make herself feel better, because she might have felt like I was saying she wasn't a good parent, even though I had said nothing of that matter. But my point being is, we also have to realize when we do tell a story that it may not evoke the emotion we're looking to get out of someone else, that it may
Yes.
make them feel a different way. And often that makes us change our own perspective of the story and reshape how we tell it. That's not exaggeration, that's polishing. That's letting something age or mature.
Mm. All right. We have not reset the room one time, and we
I
have
don't
been
think we ever said
flying
it.
for. I don't.
Well,
I
maybe
think we
you did
did.
before I
I
got on.
thought we did.
I was late.
That's exactly right.
You
When you
can write
had
tardy
wet
at my
hands.
top of my report card.
Oh, well, what are you going to do?
I don't feel tardy.
Well, and I think if you did, then there would have been a complaint from somewhere. The At the top of the session today, which is almost 45 minutes ago, which is amazing to me, we set the frame. And the frame is that everybody has a story to tell. Everyone has a story to tell. And the impact and the power and the depth and the importance of being able to tell a compelling story. We talk in the Bionic Sales book about creating a compelling future together with your prospect and with your client. And when you do that, you've got emotional buy-in, and you're creating that story together that we salespeople are tempted to turn the story into mythology. Things are much more exaggerated than what actually happened. We are tempted to make ourselves, and I'm glad you made me think of this, Doug. We are tempted to make ourselves the hero of the story. And great selling occurs when the prospect or the client is the hero of the story. Jess, please grab that. So we're here in the Bionic Sales Room every Friday. Well, most Friday.
Well, I want to wait before you do that. I want to add to that. The hero of the story thing is an interesting way to look at it. Yeah, we make ourselves the hero of our own stories, essentially because we have an idea of how the hero is supposed to behave. But if you really think of some of the most classic literature, Moby Dick or whatever, Call Me Ishmael, the anti-hero, not even anti-hero, the protagonist, the antagonist, that's all Ahab the and the whale, who is the narrator. The hero is the one that's the story from a perspective of clarity and from a vision of two story characters. So a lot of times being the hero of your own story is telling it regardless of the light that it shines on you.
Gus, I know you know already that you need to grab what he just said. Uh, that is, it is fun working with you, brother. I got to tell you, because that phrase holds true. That if we give you enough room to finish, you will land on something. You will hit the ball right out of the park. And this is not we're
You
not
just
here.
set me up for like 6 inappropriate jokes in about 3 seconds. So
Well,
please keep moving.
we'll have that when you have a double vodka tonic with lemon. All right.
I'll grab a lemon.
Um, I'll grab a lemon and we'll go have fantastic pizza and ricotta. So
Ricotta.
the ricotta, manicotti, capico. So trying to reset the room here, and we only have 16 minutes left today. This is the Bionic Sales Room. If you are listening to this after the fact, we invite you to join us in the future. We are here. We've gotten out of the habit of doing it every Friday. However, we will probably do it most Fridays going through the end of this year and into the new year. We are very excited about the forthcoming book. We're about waist deep. So how long it might take for us to finish it is anyone's guess. However, we are committed to getting a manuscript. And this was a key objective of how we were going to shift our focus and our work together. We've been chewing on this, hammering away at this, hammer and chisel, chainsaw, and fine sandpaper on these concepts, these ideas, these ways of looking at things. And to me, that's really what literature is about. I was speaking earlier about these great novels. I mean, my favorite novel of all time is Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. I love the early work of John Irving. I read Crime and Punishment, and I understand why it is viewed as a classic, but man, it gives you a headache to get through it. Why do we do this? Well, because of the larger work and our career as a salesperson, our career as a sales professional, our opportunity and privilege to lead other salespeople has got to be viewed as the larger work. It's not about today. It's not about this month. It's not about this quarter. It is about what are we doing as a larger and broader impact? What stories are we creating with our people and with our prospects and customers? And when we all get together and sit down for a meal and a few drinks, how exciting it is to listen to the stories. Oh, let me tell you what Doug did. Let me tell you about this time when Doug and I were on a cliff in a 4-wheel drive truck, and John was hyperventilating.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's. I think I said to you while we were still going on the mountain, you're like, that was scary. I'm like, it's gonna be a great story.
You
But
did. You absolutely did. And
and it's not just out of the context of what we're discussing. It's how people. A lot of times when you survive those crazy ass moments you don't want to be in, one of the first thoughts you have is this is going to be a great story.
mm,
And it's because our whole life is a series of us proceeding to the next risk and the next thing that we want to share, with others, because that excitement, that level of risk, that was something that changed your day. Now, in our case, we had a lot of stuff going on. It was just an exciting, end to what was going on. But in some cases, in somebody's mundane, humdrum life, that exciting moment, that minute that they stopped and almost hit the deer, that story they tell for 6 weeks,
Mm.
Was the first time they experienced something that pushed them forward as a human being in possibly years. So that's why our grandparents always tell us the dumbest stories when they get older, because they're just trying to continue evolving. And then I told them I gave them a 5, but you gave me a 1. It's like, Grandpa, why are you telling me this damn story? Well, because that's all the shit he had going on today, and he knows if he keeps sharing, he's evolving. Maybe he doesn't know. Maybe it's innate. Maybe it's something in our psyche. But it's like the more stories, the more experiences we have, and we get to share, the more we feel we evolve as human beings. To the point where we might just desperately tell any story just to feel like something happened that day. But really, what stories are examples of us going out and living life to the fullest.
And the common thread is sharing, right? I was talking to someone yesterday, 2 days ago, about the power of a compelling story, and I said, "Listen, Shakespeare understood that, right? Not, and I'm not talking about everybody. Oh, Shakespeare's language is so amazing, and when you see a tragedy, you say, wow, it's Shakespearean. He got it. He understood that if he could gather people and have a coherent performance, that they would leave there and they would talk about it to others. It's the Disney quote. Disney was asked, what do you think it means? What does it take to be successful? And he said, you should do what you do so well that when people see what you do, they want to come back and see you do it again, and they bring other people with them to see what you do. If that is not a fantastic frame and mantra for how we want to be perceived as salespeople, I don't know what is. We are people who want to share experiences, ideas, opportunities, and as you said, Doug, it really is. It's about us evolving. The who I mean, I heard Mike Ditka, the Super Bowl winning coach. I heard him speak, and I got to ask him a question. And I said, Coach, what are your goals now? And he said, to be a better man tomorrow than I am today. Now, I don't know how he defines that, and I don't much care. The fact that this is someone who has been at the height of his career, the pinnacle of that profession, and is still looking for that B word, still wants to be better. I
But
continue to.
every A performer is like that. Every A performer always wants to be better. But it's when we talked about this. It's A performers. The biggest issue they have is they try to be better at the same thing. Sorry, clearly there's a train coming.
I guess, well, that was beautifully timed.
That's my ride. I'm going to throw the stick over my shoulder with my little sack of food and talk to my hobo friends and head towards the Golden State. Uh, you guys want to see a dead body?
Oh, ew. Oh, my God.
It's from Stand By Me. You haven't
I
gotten
know it.
my
I was going to say it. I was inhaling before I could say it. That's from Stan. You guys want to see a dead body?
Anyway,
Uh,
I think that the thing with when we tie this to sales is that, and look, I don't think I've done a pitch or even loosely had a conversation with the prospect and not told 2 or 3 stories. Especially when I sense that they're not either aligning with, understanding, or necessarily believing what I have to say. Those stories take it out of a context of me telling them what they need to do in their life, or asking too many digging questions or trying to explain something that might not resonate. But it allows me to give them a perspective of someone else that I know that did something and that they can see similarities in, because they need to feel emotion from this, and they're not going to feel it from me if I'm not sharing the experience they want to feel. So you said earlier, you're going to do this, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. That is not nearly as effective as I had this one client, and when they did this, this happened.
right.
And it's because the story has power. It
The
establishes
story has power. Exactly. And I realized several years ago that if they want me to explain the impact of what I do, I don't talk about numbers. I talk about a journey. I say, listen, I went on a journey with an organization where we started here and we got there. And the validation of that is powerful, but people want to go on a journey like that. And they want to know what it feels like to go on that journey. And I want to go back to something that you said earlier, which is usually the case. And, I just, when people come to our workshops or they see us keynote, they're going to say, I saw them last week and it was a completely different thing. I listened to them on Clubhouse and they've never said this shit before. So anyway, you said before, it depends on what I have to say. I love the double entendre of where that word shows up and what it means. Here's what I have to say. Think about salespeople. Have to say means that I'm compelled. My head will explode if I don't say it. The more engaging and professional salespeople, they have in their bucket, in their toolbox, they have these things. They own. They possess these things that, when they are said, bring people on that emotional journey. So I either have to say it because I'm compelled, or I have it to say. And
Well, let's remember what we said at the beginning. It's a
please,
salesperson's job to get the story.
yes,
And you're not there to tell the story. You're there to help them tell theirs. A lot of times telling them other stories is just getting them into a state where they're comfortable giving you theirs. And once you're helping them write the next chapter of their story, you've established their trust. And it's a new salesperson walking in the room and going, well, I have no stories to tell. Yeah, but you got a lot of fucking questions to ask. And you should be asking everyone. And every time you hear one, you should be telling that story to the next person. The last person I talked to, they said this, this, and this. And that's how you develop experience, and that's how you build trust, and that's how people see you as a subject matter expert, not because you sat there and read a manual, but because you had the capacity to absorb experiences around your trade and then be able to share those experiences with people that might want that same experience or might want to avoid that same experience.
Well, this is the power of the parable, right? Some of the greatest stories ever told out of mythology, out of fiction, or out of, I grew up with this guy who. That's a parable, because the subject or the main character in the story is not identified by name. And that's what I mean. Mythology wanted to name things. They named Cassiopeia, named Apollo, named.
I think there's power in a name. I think that if you didn't say Dan Levy, I wouldn't remember Dan Levy.
Fair enough.
I think there's so much power in a name. I think when you give it a name, it makes it believable. I was talking to this guy. Yeah, that's everybody you talk to. But when even if you say, let's just call this person Nosy Nicky, you do it, and all of a sudden people are a little bit more interested in what that person had to say or do, because now it's a story that they can picture in their own head.
Mm-hmm. And if you don't name them, then what happens is that the listener imagines someone who is very similar to them, because we all want to be the hero of our own story. We do. I want to be the hero of my marriage. I want to be the hero of my parenting work. I want to be the hero of the writing that I've done for 35 years. Of course, I want to be the hero. And how do I do that? I make sure that other people are the hero.
Here's a really good proof case of that. And when you're
Let's
kids, it's interesting. Like, you look at these, look at the Avengers, right? When you're kids, it's which one. When you're adults, it's which one's your favorite. But when you're kids, it's which one do you want to be. But the answer's the same. You're looking at a cast of characters, and you're trying to figure out which hero you align with the most. Which part would you play in that hero's story? That's why people love those types of movies and love to go out and watch them together. They have a lot more success than individual movies most of the time, because there's a collective rooting for your person. It's why supergroups do so well. New Kids on the Block, I could still name every new kid that my sister and her friends had claimed. They all had a boy. Yeah, because you're picking your story and your fantasy or whatever it might be. And it's like everybody knows which. I was too old for this, but a lot of people know which Power Ranger they were going to be, or which Transformer they were, whatever it is.
Oh, yeah.
You are finding your part of the narrative in that story being told, because there's always somebody that you feel you can align with. And that's why anti-hero stories do so well. That's why stuff like Deadpool does so well, because those of us that have made some mistakes in life can still see ourselves in a hero story.
Doug, in the years that we've known each other, have I ever told you about the first time I met my now 15-year friend, Tim Reitman?
I'm sure you have, but I think that there's more people in the room, so feel free to tell it. We've got 5 minutes.
Well, here's the thing about that moment is that I was introduced to someone who had won the Super Bowl in 1985 by a mutual friend because the athlete wanted to work on a book that was the story of his life, which is a fascinating story. So we meet in the San Fernando Valley at an Italian restaurant. And when we spoke over the phone, I said, "So how will we know each other?" Because we didn't have pictures of each other. He says, "Oh, you'll know it's me." Well, he walks up, he's 6'3", 250. It's like, yeah, that's probably the athlete. So we shake hands and we walk in. Now I'm just nervous and excited because I'm sitting down to have lunch with someone who won the Super Bowl. And for a football fan like me, that is a big deal. I don't care what position they played. The guy is wearing a Super Bowl ring. And this was, that's not the amazing part of the story. The amazing part of the story is we sit down at the table. I look to my left and Mickey Dolenz is eating lunch at the table next to us. Those of you that don't know, Mickey Dolenz was a lead singer, the monkey, a lead singer and the drummer in the Monkees. And I look back at this guy who I should be completely focused on, this athlete who is wearing a Super Bowl ring, and I say, "Oh my God, my childhood hero is sitting at the next table." I, in that moment, realized that the reason I sang and the reason I played drums was not because Phil Collins had done it, but because Mickey Dolenz had done it. That he is who I wanted to be. He was the one of the Monkees that I wanted to be. So when you say, who do you want to be? Like you said, the Power Rangers or the Transformers.
Yeah, it
or
was
the
nice to meet a
Avengers.
football player, but you didn't fantasize about being a football player. You fantasized about being a drummer.
Yep. And a lead singer, both at the same time.
And so it's like you were having, well, there's a lot that we could digest here or open up here and cut apart, and probably shouldn't because we only got a couple of minutes. But the crazy thing is that you were in a moment where you were experiencing something, but you went backwards towards an emotional state that you wanted to feel because you wanted to hear another story. You wanted to hear you want to hear Mickey Dolan's story more
Absolutely.
than you wanted to hear the story of, what was his name, Ted?
Tim.
So Tim. So in that case, it's like, wouldn't it have been a great story if you invited him over and you guys all had drinks?
Well, here's what actually happened is that Tim said, "Well, don't you want to go talk to him?" I said, "No, I'm not going to interrupt the guy." He says, "Bullshit." And Tim stands up and walks over and towers over Mickey Dolenz. He says, "Excuse me, Mr. Dolenz, do you have a minute?" And he looks up at him. He says, "Yeah." He says, "My friend over here says that you're his childhood hero. Will you take a picture with him?" And Dolenz looks at me, looks back at Tim and says, "Do you mind if I finish my lunch first?" So he did. And the bad news is that we took that picture with a phone that I no longer own, and I lost the photo, but I haven't lost the memory.
Yeah, and you know what? That's so John Clemson. I left it on the phone. I don't know how to get it off.
Yeah, I know. One of these days I'm going to understand technology.
And you know what?
Doug, where is that document? I don't know where to find that document. I'll tell you what, John, we're going to name it something that you're never going to forget.
And you hate it. So you tell him. Tell him what I called it. You say it.
It's called The Fucking Book. I'm always going to be able to find that document now.
Yep. Anyway.
All right, we got to wrap this up.
Jess, you got a minute. How'd we do?
You guys did great. You went all over the place. You covered everything.
I laughed. I cried. It was better than cats. Great story, bro.
Tell it again.
Go sell something, you crazy SOBs. We'll see you next week.
Have a great day, everybody.
Deuces.